A chunk of ice nearly as big as Shanghai may break off of Antarctica at any moment.
Scientists say Antarctica is about to give birth to one of the largest icebergs on record.
A 200-kilometer-long crack in the sheet of ice has deepened and is ready to give way entirely, launching one of the biggest icebergs on record into the ocean.
CNN has reported that a huge ice sheet more than half the size of Qatar could soon break off from Antarctica.
Scientists are predicting a 110-mile sheet of ice, a chunk the size of the state of Delaware, will break off Antarctica in the coming days or weeks. The cause is warming ocean waters, and the ice melt has implications for sea level rise well beyond the South Pole region.
A chunk of ice nearly as big as Shanghai may break off of Antarctica at any moment. The European Space Agency is using this satellite to monitor the Larsen C ice formation. A 200-kilometer-long crack in the sheet of ice has deepened and is ready to give way entirely, launching one of the biggest icebergs on record into the ocean. Researchers say it's a result of a changing climate that is altering the polar environments.
As you can see, the glacier no longer ends in the sea. Now we have beach. 20 or 30 years ago, those beaches did not exist. The glacier was falling directly to the sea. In other words, there has been a glacial retreat, probably a consequence of the climate change and the rise of temperature in this region.
The environment at the North and South Poles is changing rapidly and impacting the global climate. The world's polar ice caps are shrinking little by little. The Arctic is heating up twice as fast as the rest of the planet, with Greenland's glaciers receding particularly quickly. This process is speeding up. Melting snow exposes ice underneath, which then absorbs the sun's rays and leads to more thawing. At the opposite end of the Earth, 90% of the ice shelves on the Antarctic Peninsula are starting to disintegrate. Ice melt is also being observed in mountain ranges like the Himalayas, Kilimanjaro, the Alps, and the Pyrenees. In the Andes, glaciers are retreating and risk disappearing altogether. Ocean levels are rising due to the combination of melting ice and warmer sea temperatures, as warm water has a greater volume than cold water. At the current rate, scientists predict that by the year 2100, sea levels will rise between 26 centimeters and 1 meter. Islands in the Pacific or Indian Oceans like the Maldives will be submerged. Densely populated low-lying coastal areas like Bangladesh, Vietnam, the Netherlands, and the east coast of the United States are all under threat. A 2014 report from the Union of Concerned Scientists warns that within 30 years, Washington, D.C., here along the Potomac River, could see 300 flooding events a year due to rising sea levels, and the impact in other parts of the world could be much more severe.
Scientists say Antarctica is about to give birth to one of the largest icebergs on record. A crack in one of the continent's ice shelves has been growing for decades, but a team of UK glaciologists said the fracture shifted toward the open ocean last month. That fissure reportedly lengthened by 11 miles in just 1 week and is now just 8 miles from the coast. A scientist with the U.S. Geological Survey said June 1st, a massive chunk could break off within days. Once a piece separates from the ice shelf, it becomes an iceberg. This one is expected to be 1,900 square miles in size, comparable to the state of Delaware. Scientists monitoring the Larsen C ice shelf said the event will, quote, leave the ice front at its most retreated position ever recorded. They predict the Larsen C shelf could completely collapse after the break.
CNN has reported that a huge ice sheet more than half the size of Qatar could soon break off from Antarctica. If the Larsen C breaks free, it'll be one of the world's biggest ever icebergs, measuring 6,000 square kilometers or 2,300 square miles. That's the size of 4 Londons or more than 7 New York cities. According to the European Space Agency, or ESA, in early June, scientists said the Larsen C was 8 miles from the edge of the ice. It is now just 3 miles away. Larsen C is a portion of the Greater Larsen Ice Shelf on the northeastern coast of Antarctica. The ESA is monitoring the sheet through Cryosat, its mission dedicated to ice sheets in Antarctica and Greenland, along with a duo of ESA radars. If it drifts away, there are fears Larsen C could pose a danger to ships.
Scientists are predicting a 110-mile sheet of ice, a chunk the size of the state of Delaware, will break off Antarctica in the coming days or weeks. The cause is warming ocean waters, and the ice melt has implications for sea level rise well beyond the South Pole region. The National Geographic July issue cover story is called "Antarctica is Melting, and Giant Ice Cracks Are Just the Start." Joining me now from Birmingham, Alabama to discuss this is Robert Krunzig, the senior environmental editor for National Geographic. Thanks for joining us. First of all, a chunk of ice the size of Delaware seems almost impossible to put our heads around, but that's actually a small piece when you think of the size of Antarctica.
Yes, it is, and it's even just a small piece, Hari, of the Larsen C ice shelf that it's breaking off of. Larsen C is a floating slab of ice that's the size of Vermont and New Hampshire combined. And what's happening there is that a rift that has been growing for years now, this year really accelerated. As you said, it's about 15 miles wide, and it's been growing from south to north, basically going to slice a big chunk of ice off the ice shelf, and that chunk will be the size of Delaware.
You know, we have a picture of one of the cracks that are going through. Scientists have been looking and studying and trying to get at some of these cracks for a long time. How deep does it go down, and why are they so concerned?
The crack in Larsen C, where Larsen C meets the sea, it's about 600 feet thick. And most of that is underwater, so there's an ice cliff of about 60 feet that towers above the waves. So the crack goes about at least 600 feet. If this iceberg goes, the worry is that the whole ice shelf might collapse, as other ice shelves on the Antarctic Peninsula have already collapsed. And ice shelves there and elsewhere around Antarctica are really kind of the canaries in the coal mine, that they're a sign of what's happening all over, which is that Antarctica is melting faster than scientists had expected.
So this isn't just about the fact that the ice is already in the water and it's just melting in a glass of water, say. We're actually adding new ice cubes to that glass, which is what makes the sea level rise.
Well, yes, that's the perfect analogy. This ice, the Larsen C ice shelf, is floating. It is like an ice cube in a glass of water. So even if all of it collapses, that itself does not add to sea level. But the thing about ice shelves is that they function like corks. They're bottling up a much larger amount of ice that's on the ground, on the land in this case, behind them. And when that's the glaciers that are carrying ice from the interior of Antarctica towards the sea. The ice shelves are really just sort of the floating ends of the glaciers. And so when that flow increases, more ice is falling into the sea and raising sea level.
In the article, it talks about how scientists measure what's happening kind of underwater. What's happening underneath these ice sheets? How is there warmer water, and what's the interaction of salt water do to this all?
Well, the big thing that's been happening in recent years is that warmer ocean water, and when I say warmer, I don't mean really warm. We're talking about 4 or 5 degrees above freezing. That water is penetrating further up towards the coast of Antarctica under the ice shelves, and it is undermining the ice shelves. It's melting them and thinning them from below and weakening them.
You know, you have a large map that you have in the National Geographic article that kind of puts this in perspective, and there's areas of kind of purple that are the areas that are kind of floating off, and then there's a couple of patches of red where it's really happening at an incredible rate. Tell us about how fast it's happening in, say, the Pine Glacier.
Basically, it's been an acceleration by several times. All over Antarctica, the loss of ice from the floating ice shelves has increased by a factor of 12 in the past 2 decades. So where in the mid-90s they were losing 6 billion tons of ice, now they're losing 74. What it is it's natural for these glaciers to flow to the sea, but what's happening is the speed has increased.
Robert Krunzig, the senior environment editor for National Geographic. Thanks so much for joining us.
Earth's air conditioner is heating up. Alex Dimitri reports vast amounts of Arctic ice are melting away, and we're feeling the effects right here in Maryland.
NASA tracks Arctic ice from space and the ground, and what researchers are seeing at the Goddard Space Flight Center doesn't look good.
We've almost lost like 2/3 of the volume of the ice since 1979. So that is a huge amount, a huge loss.
Warmer summers and winters are melting ice at record levels.
It's almost like the air conditioning for the planet, if you will. I mean, the sea ice and the ice caps reflect most of the solar energy back to space, and so it keeps us cool.
Melting Arctic ice doesn't raise sea levels directly, but the warmth it generates does. In Greenland, warming temperatures are turning massive amounts of ice into water that is contributing to rising sea levels. Then there's the impact on the jet stream. Arctic ice plays a part in how it behaves.
And what that means for us here in Maryland is it impacts the way that the atmosphere interacts with the land and with the oceans.
We all felt that impact 2 winters ago when air normally locked up at the North Pole plunged south. A huge dip in the jet stream ushered in the polar vortex. We froze, in part because the Arctic is warming up. Alex Dimitri, WJZ Eyewitness News.
Globally, this past July was the hottest since record keeping began in 2016, and 2016 is on track to be the warmest year ever.